Hello, Herkimer County. This is Michele Hummel with the Herkimer County Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today with our executive producer, Dave Warner. You got a promotion.
I got the wrong guy there. Executive producer.
Yeah.
You scared me. It's like, holy crap.
I gave him a promotion.
Yeah,
so.
I
I
like
need more
that.
money from him.
Yeah,
I brought him a coffee mug today for payment, so he's official.
So I'm an executive producer now because
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And I'm also here with Chris Chochran. You'll remember
I thought you were
him.
gonna forget. Like,
no, I'm
who is he? Some guy.
You'll remember Chris from quite a few weeks back. We spoke about Launch Herkimer.
Yeah.
And you came into town. I will say I did not know you well then, and now I'm proud to call you and your wife both my friend.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scary.
So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
We wanted to kind of give an update on Launch Herkimer, what progress has been made, and where we're going next.
Yeah. So we should do that.
We should. We absolutely should. So this is going to be a little bit different than normal because both Chris and I are involved in this now.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've evolved a little bit. And the Launch Herkimer initiative has been wonderful. It's been great. We've really got a good sense of community on board and behind the whole thing. And your contract is running up that you are currently under. You want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the village actually contracted with me to do this work over a 6-month period of time. And the original plan was always that I would be at the end of 6 months done and the work would go on without me, which is always what I preferred as well, because I feel like when people take their future into their own hands, it's always more productive than somebody coming in and corralling and directing for a long period of time. That's why we call it Launch Herkimer, was to give it a launch and then pull out and let everybody else take it from there and then continue on. Doesn't mean that I'm going to be completely gone out of this situation. But what it does mean, though, is that for a period of time, we were super influential in what was going on. And now we're starting to kind of pull back just a little bit and ease into other people taking on some of those roles. Because when people are in a village take ownership of what they're doing, we see amazing things happen as opposed to governments, elected officials, or those people being pointed to all the time and being asked to do all the work.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
We're proud to announce that the next chapter of Launch Herkimer, we've actually filed for a 501c3,
Yep.
and I will say we've actually become incorporated
Yes.
as of yesterday, so that was great. We have a tax ID,
Yes.
and the new name will be Herkimer Next.
Yes, actually, and the cool part about that is too. Again, it really speaks to the transition from the launching and pushing off. Like think of it like a boat being pushed off from shore, as opposed to the next thing that's coming and the long term implications of what's going on there. Why don't you? Because Michele, one of the things that's happened in these the working groups that we created early, like 5 months ago, was that we had different groups focused on very different tasks. And one of those was the finance group and the funding group, trying to figure out, well, how are we going to make sure that this is a long-term, sustainable effort here and not just 6 months and then it's a flash in the pan. And part of what came out of that was the ability to form a nonprofit. Would you kind of explain, first off, I want to say that we were sitting in a meeting not too long ago. We got to the place where someone just said, we need to just form this nonprofit. And the only way that you can do that is to have a board. And so someone said, well, I nominate this person to be the secretary, this person to be the CFO, and this person to be the president. And you were elected actually the president of that nonprofit. Give us a little bit about your feelings on that nonprofit and why you think it's so important and why you were willing to take on that role.
I really am passionate about this. It's evolved into something that I did not expect. When I became involved, I thought, well, I frankly live in Ilion, although I'm with the Herkimer County Chamber of Commerce, so I have a vested interest in all businesses, really in all towns and cities nearby. So as we started to move forward, I got the sense that this could really take on something much larger than originally intended. Not only could it help Herkimer, but it could also help surrounding areas throughout the Mohawk Valley. Could be Ilion, could be Mohawk, whatever the case may be. So we're really going to grow this very slowly and intentionally.
Right.
And that was my thought. Let's slow down a little bit and really do things by the book. I'm very by the book.
Right.
I live my life like, I might get sued any moment. So I make sure that our ducks are in a row at all times. And I thought that if we formed this not-for-profit, we're not going to come out of the gate, running and charging and asking everybody for boatloads of money. That's not the intention here.
Right.
But the intention is to perhaps help other not-for-profits that need assistance in obtaining their grants
Right.
and kind of walking them through that process and actually implementing their grants as well. And certainly if we see projects along the way, we will, go after. There are grants available that do not require a municipality. We always want a municipality to be working in tandem with us, and we want to have a good working relationship there. But if there's a situation in any municipality that arises where we can't do that, there are grants available that can help a not-for-profit, clean up Main Street, do something along those lines, and they don't require a signature from the entire municipality.
And we should probably jump into that a little bit, because I think that one of the misnomers about a nonprofit like this is, well, this is another charity organization, and that's not the role of this at all. And if you go back to the very original thought of how I got involved here, there was a consultant brought in to do the entire Herkimer County vision planning for like a 10-year vision plan, make recommendations. And one of the things that he recommended was some of these smaller municipalities, such as Herkimer, Mohawk, Ilion, maybe even Webb, the town of Webb, should be going through a similar process to this. But they're understaffed and under-resourced to be able to do a lot of the work that is required by not just vision casting and economic development, but also if there was a grant to be administrated. So one of the things that people don't realize in the process of getting especially large grants from the state of New York is that it requires a group to administrate that grant. And that administration involves reporting, it involves working with consultants from the state, it involves a lot of those things. And when you look at a village where there are 4 employees at administrative level or 5 employees at administrative level who already have full-time jobs, there's just not the bandwidth there for them to jump in and do that. So part of this nonprofit's role moving forward is they get to take that burden off of a municipality in the region and start actually being able to administrate those grants for them so that they can qualify for those grants, because without that administrative capacity, the state just won't give them the grants. So it's not so much that this is a big charitable organization where it's going to be running around with their hand out, and it's more that they're fulfilling a role, this charitable or this 501c3 is fulfilling a role within these communities that nobody else is fulfilling right now just because of bandwidth, budgets, and other overhead. Does that make...
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes.
So it's incorporated now. It's Herkimer Next. There's a board already, or there's an executive team already.
There is, yeah.
And what's the next steps for the 501c3?
Okay, so we have the tax ID, as I mentioned, and we are now filing with the federal government to become a not-for-profit, and that does take some time, but the interesting part of that is, I'm just making up numbers, if it takes 6 months to get approved, it goes retro back to the date that you asked. So,
that's awesome.
So we've done it today. So when we actually get state approval, federal approval, then it will go back to today's date, and we will be a not-for-profit. This will be our anniversary.
Right. And the other side of that, too, is, by the way, if someone were to desire to give towards the work of Herkimer Next, it really just comes down to their tax deduction. Anybody can take a donation. It's just a matter of whether or not they can deduct it from their federal income taxes as a charitable donation. So if somebody even today said, hey, I want to do this, and it was 16 months from now, they still would be able to do this later on in the process. They could actually put this on their federal income tax return, hopefully within the year, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We realized that was important. We didn't, some folks were starting to go out and try to solicit funds, and I really did express, let's kind of pump the brakes on that until we know that we can legally accept it. And, now with a tax ID, we'll be having our bank account set up. I mean, ready to go. And I do want to make point to tell everybody, this is not something I'm being paid for. This is me volunteering my time because I sincerely believe in this cause.
Right.
I've had people approach me and say, what are you thinking? What are you
Right.
what are you doing? And we're essentially starting from ground zero with a empty file cabinet. Well, we have our first file.
Right.
So I'm excited about that opportunity, and I'm here to help. I want to make a difference.
I'm excited to have you in that position. I think it's a great fit for you. Let's talk a little bit about the long-term stability of this and why this piece is integral to the long-term stability of the Launch Herkimer initiative and now Herkimer Next. Give me your thoughts on where you see that, the financial piece playing in. Also, like, why is it important that this be here as opposed to just letting it run its course and just kind of let it do its thing?
Right. So, I believe that this is going to be here long term. Administrations do change, and so this will be here for the next administration and those to come. And I'm hoping that we can add people to this as well to visit with other municipalities, and we hope that we can assist them on some level.
Absolutely.
And so the financial piece of it, we'll grow it. We will as time goes on, and I didn't even answer your question. I start to ramble. Isn't that terrible?
No, I think you did. It's interesting, too, because I think that organizations change over time and community initiatives change over time. And some people aren't used to seeing those transitions. So when a big grant comes down the pipeline and somebody says, hey, we're going to do this grant, and they rally up all the people and go, we're going to get all this money. People get all excited, and then 6 months goes by and they don't hear anything or something. And so there's some transition that goes on, and anyone who's been a part of any fledgling organization understands that the beginning of that organization is really a lot of, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to, and I wouldn't even call it hype. It's more about getting people excited about the prospect of something happening. And then there needs to be a transition in an organization, because if you think about the Red Cross, for example, if the Red Cross ran around going, we're going to do this, and then floods happened and hurricanes happened and you never saw them doing anything, you'd be like, well, when are you going to start doing that work? And so there needs to be a transition in any organization, especially one that has altruistic motives or economic development at its heart or philanthropic endeavors. There needs to be a transition where you stop talking about what's going to happen and start talking about what is happening. And oftentimes when you talk about what is happening, that takes time.
It does. I've actually had people say, well, I haven't heard anything about Launch Herkimer lately, so it must be done. Well, again, it takes time. So, I've had people say that directly to me. And it's funny because I'll say, well, I don't know where you heard this because I filed the paperwork. I'm doing this. So, I don't know how much closer you can get to the actual project at hand. Right. So, yeah, we're hearing a lot of that. So I want everyone to be patient with this. You're not going to see big changes overnight.
Right.
That's not how we're designed, and that's not how we want to be designed, quite honestly. We want to go out and accomplish things, and when we do accomplish those things, we'll celebrate.
Yeah.
We absolutely will celebrate, but we're not going to overpromise and underdeliver.
In the last town hall meeting I talked about the fact that if you think about the condition of Herkimer as a village, or even any city in the Mohawk Valley or village in the Mohawk Valley, whatever condition they're in today, that didn't happen in the course of 6 months or 9 months or a year, even 3, 5, 10 years. It was decades that brought us to where we're at today. And so it could be a decade before we see real viable financial prosperity for all citizens of Herkimer as far as the village goes. And it could be a decade before we see a regional impact. That doesn't mean we're not going to see pieces moving in place. That doesn't mean we're not going to see new projects. It doesn't mean that we're not going to see restoration to buildings and other buildings being torn down. And there's progress going to be made.
Right.
But the work itself, there's no arriving. I mean, really, honestly, there is no arriving because time marches on. And you have to continue to cultivate and build the community that you want to build. And that changes based on if tomorrow 100,000 Ukrainians were led into the United States and the United States government said, hey, we're going to drop them in Herkimer County. Guess what? That transforms everything, right? And that's a hypothetical situation, but one that we could actually see happening. So as things change, we need to react and change with them. If the economy nationally or internationally goes up or down, you gotta play by those rules. And so it becomes a situation where, again, this didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a long term. Part of my job was to get everybody excited and rowing in the same direction. Now that we've got some of that momentum going, now it's time to start doing what's plodding along, for lack of a better term. When you start a locomotive, there's a big, like old school locomotive, there's a big plume of steam and you hear all this noise and then it's a chug, chug, chunk, and that's where we're at, I think, in this process.
Yes, absolutely. And there will be some things that continue alongside of what we're doing internally. So, for example, on the 22nd, there's a big cleanup initiative. We're going to go to Main Street from 10 to 1 and clean windows. We've got squeegees, we've got all of those things. People are donating their time and their supplies, and everyone is welcome. Please come out, but we're going to go ahead and make sure that 100 block is cleaned up.
Right.
And it's something very small. So in addition to what we're doing behind the scenes trying to make things grow, there will be things for the community to be involved in.
Absolutely. And the part of the Launch Herkimer initiative was or is the events group too.
Yes.
So there is a group focused on how do we continue to gather as a community, celebrate Herkimer as a community, remind people that they're not alone, know who your neighbors are. And that's part of the reason this cleanup came about too, was in full transparency, we had an event plan that conflicted with another event that was almost identical event, but was specifically for domestic abuse awareness. And we thought that's not very neighborly to like try to steal attention away from that. So let's actually join them on that and do a street cleanup instead for Main Street. And that Main Street cleanup, I got some feelings from people that, well, why is that a Main Street cleanup? Why is that a Launch Herkimer initiative? That doesn't help economic development. Now, maybe you can kind of share why you think Main Street cleanup is important at this point.
The heart and soul of the village seems to lie within Main Street, and you said it best. You could go 2 blocks over, build a mansion, and beautiful homes around it, and people would still say, what the heck, Main Street's awful.
Yeah.
So it's really a large part of the psyche in the village. So we need to plug along and try to redevelop it in some way, but we need to try to maintain it as well, so it doesn't get worse.
Yeah.
And some things are beyond our control right now.
Right.
But we can help clean windows. We've reached out to all of the owners, so that's key, and they've all been agreeable and said absolutely come out and do it. So we hope that expands, but it's so important to make sure that the entire community is still paying attention to Main Street. We're here, and we might be working on something that has nothing to do with Main Street, but it's always going to be, at our center of our heart, really.
There's an old Jewish proverb that says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I've always loved that proverb because it really demonstrates when you invest into something, you can't not care about it. And so I'm this is going to sound very self-serving, but I'm a huge Seattle Mariners fan. And last night
I'm
was
sorry.
the playoff game.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
But I'm still to this day heartbroken. But that's because I've invested 21 years into following this team, and time and money and tickets and trips and all that. And so when you invest in something, whether it be a sports team or whether it be your local community, when you have actual treasure, the things that you value, that you've invested in something, your heart is there. And we want to remind people that you can invest your time, treasure, or talents into things like cleaning up Main Street. And in doing so, what you're doing is you're giving back to the community. You're showing other people they're not alone. You're actually working with your neighbors towards some end. And when you're investing of yourself into your community, you're actually doing something good for yourself. It's not even, it's beneficial to you. And it's more than it feels good. It actually helps you understand and see with different eyes what's happening there on Main Street, as opposed to pointing fingers at everybody else. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And Main Street may have a very different look in the future.
That's true.
We don't know. There might be a lot of green space eventually. That would be fine. We've got Albany Street right there, which is a beautiful street. Let's celebrate that a little bit too. And many things are in the works to try to draw some attention. Now, are we going to hold a huge event on Main Street? Well, I can't speak for other groups, but right now, the Herkimer Next will not be holding any major events right on Main Street until it's safe for everyone to come out and gather as a group and bring their children and feel comfortable with it. It's not to say there's maybe another street that we couldn't visit and try to pull people together.
And one thing to that point is perception is reality, right? And so there's two pieces to this. One of them is there are people who perceive Main Street as not safe, and there are people who go, I walk there every day, it's totally fine. Until there's some publicity and PR work done around Main Street, and it feels inviting, and it feels like this is a place of welcoming congregation, then it gets hard to throw an event there. The other side of this too is I think that a lot of people have this feeling that their communities, whatever, I don't care if you live in a city of 10 million people or a village of 10 people. There's a lot of people who feel like there are all kinds of regulations and engineering studies and that's how we determine what goes on in a community. And at the end of the day, we all can determine what we want our community to be. If the people of Herkimer said the village wanted to tear down all the buildings on the 100 block, now, I would say that's a mistake, but let's just say they wanted to tear down every building and turn it into one giant park right in the center of town. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. I mean, that's
right.
There's legal channels you have to go through. There's some proceedings you'd have to go through officially, but that can be done. So what becomes super important is that people who have a feeling about how it should or shouldn't look on Main Street, to your point, it could look different. It's really, really important, especially at this point, that people be involved in the process and have their voice heard. Because one of the things we've learned in our working groups are there are people who have really crazy ideas that are really crazy good ideas. And they've never had a voice before because they've never been involved in a city council meeting
right.
or a public hearing or those kind of things. Talk a little bit about how you feel like Herkimer Next fits into that piece and how it plays a part in bringing people together long term to have their voice being heard.
Well, you're right. I've met some incredible people, some people that were just hiding in plain sight that are really, I mean, they have super talents that they can bring to the table and fabulous ideas. So we want to keep encouraging that. And, some of the things, the person that we chose as our CFO, where has he been? I know he's retired now, so we're probably seeing a little more of him, and I won't mention his name. But, he's really going to be a wonderful piece of this. And I can't believe how many people are out there. Honestly, you do tend to see the same people doing the similar things within the community. So I think that there's a group of people that perhaps they don't realize that they can be involved. And now we have a means of saying, you're welcome. Yes. You're 100% welcome. And just because you're not a trustee and you can't vote on certain things doesn't mean you don't have the right to do other things.
Right.
We absolutely embrace that. And I think it's really important that those people, we haven't even connected with everybody yet. So I think when we do see some more progress and see some things, you're going to see even more people come out of the woodwork.
Yep.
And it's going to happen. We're going to grow this. There's going to be a Facebook page. There's going to be, we're not going to go jumping on all of the news media outlets at this juncture.
Right.
It's someday, yeah, we hope so. But right now we're going to be thoughtful. We're going to be very intentional about this, and we're going to grow it very responsibly.
I want to talk real quick about the diversity of people that we've had involved and kind of to what we would like to see more longer term as far as diversity of thought goes. There was a tech company in the early 2000s who were having problems in Silicon Valley because they were hiring the same kinds of people over and over. Mm-hmm. And it became this monoculture of people who all thought the same way, acted the same way, in a lot of cases dressed the same way. And so when a problem would arise, they would all attack that problem with the exact same thinking behind it. And so they were running into issues that were solvable, but they couldn't find a solution for it because they all thought the same. And so it'd be similar to if I said, well, hey, this cup here on the counter, we broke this cup and it needs to be fixed, and your and my background is exactly the same. We go, well, it can't be fixed, and so let's just throw it away and get a new one. Well, somebody else who actually has a background in porcelain repair would go, well, this is fixable. You're probably not going to drink out of it, but it is fixable. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thinking is interesting. And what happened was, this is a little business lesson for everybody. This company found that in their interview process, they were asking the exact same questions that had been written by the same people who were part of this monoculture. And so what they found was people who grew up in the South keep their ketchup in the pantry. People who grew up in the North keep their ketchup in the refrigerator. So when you run out of ketchup in your household as a child, your substitutions for, well, I'm out of ketchup, what else do I use, are different if it's in the pantry than it would be if it's in the refrigerator.
That's a really good point.
Yes. Yes. And so they added to their interview process the question, where did you keep the ketchup growing up? Was it in the pantry or the refrigerator? And they started hiring people from kept the ketchup in the pantry because that was where the diversity came from. And what they found was because people complain about diversity a lot about, well, we're just trying to like create a there's a lot of negativity when you hear the words diversity, but when you have diversity of thought in a problem solving process, what you end up with are better solutions that are more applicable to more people. So a really good example is if we decided to turn Main Street into an ice skating rink 24/7, 365 days a year, it's an ice skating rink. Well, there's a lot of people who would be affected by that in a very negative way. A lot of them are people who live other places in the county and we need to drive down Main Street while they go to the DMV, right?
Right.
Some of them are people who are disabled and couldn't cross the street because they can't get across the ice. There are all kinds of people who there are a lot of elderly who would never be able to participate in that and see that as a very detrimental thing to their day-to-day living. So when you make these decisions, it is really, really, really important that young people are involved, that elderly people are involved, that people who even feel like they don't have a voice, marginalized citizens who really have never had a voice or feel like their people group doesn't get a say in things, all those people need to be involved in the creation of what we want the village to be long term, because when that takes place, everyone benefits long term and everybody gets something better than if the 10 people who've always done it say, what if we did this? And everyone goes, why'd you do that? That's silly. As opposed to all of us going, because anytime you do something, there's positives and negatives. And so it's really important that there be some diversity in the thinking behind this, which is why I've since day one said we need as many people involved in this process as possible.
Right. This is an opportunity for everyone's voice to be heard. It's a call to action for the village, for the citizens, and I hope that they take advantage of that.
From what you've seen so far, is there a specific group you would like to see more involved that hasn't been?
Yes, the younger people. So, I'm a really big advocate for youth leadership. I'd love to see more of it in our area. And they are the leaders of tomorrow. So we really need to engage them today, if possible, and get some of them involved. You and I have talked about different leadership programs that perhaps we could do at some point. That's a different subject, but I would really love to see some high school students involved, college level students involved.
Right.
Instead of them thinking, oh, this doesn't pertain to me. Well, it does, because this is your tomorrow.
Right.
Now is the best time for you to get involved.
In my hometown, I think it was last year, 2021, a 19-year-old ran for city council. And in fact, a 19-year-old ran for city council, and so did a 20-year-old. And they ran together on this platform of like, we're thinking differently because we're different and we're younger and we are from a different generation. And what he learned, what those two young men learned in that process will forever shape who they are and how they get involved. And what came out of that was, because they ran for, and one of them got like 150 votes in a city of 67,000 people. One got like 150 votes. The other one got 300 votes. Neither one of them won. But what it did do is show them that they can actually have a voice and they can play a part in the process. And they fully plan on running at a larger scale regionally and even nationally now long term because of the positive experience they had of running for city council. So when you talk about high school kids, college kids, I 100%, that resonates with me, and we need everybody involved. I don't care if you're 21 years old and you go, I work at a pizza place and I don't have any other life and I play video games all the time. Well, guess what? You have a view on the world that a lot of people don't have, and you need to be involved in this process because you live here. Right. So help us turn it into what we want it to be, what you want it to be, because there's not that long in the future, you're going to be the only one left, because we're all going to be dead because we're old people, right? And not you, but I am.
Well,
right?
I think we're pretty close in age.
But it's not that long before the people who are running things aren't going to be here anymore, or they're going to retire and they're going to move to Florida and they're not going to have the wherewithal to be as involved as they are now. It's time today for those younger people to start stepping up and bringing their ideas and their thoughts and their influences, because oftentimes they're the ones with the most energy, right?
Absolutely. And so many times I've seen it with youth in my own family, my daughter. Sometimes they don't feel like helping out, but once you drag them sometimes kicking and screaming, well, not really, but they come along with you, and at the end, they're like, wow, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I did that, and that builds a foundation for tomorrow. So I would urge any of them that might be listening, or the parents that are listening, encourage your kids to get involved.
It's been really interesting too, because the people who have gotten involved so far came because they were curious and stayed because they felt empowered. in a lot of times, or they understood that they have a role to play here, and you kind of fell into that same situation. Tell people kind of how you got involved, because you had no intention of getting involved with Launch Herkimer.
So I did offer up the chamber boardroom for a meeting location, because that's, we have that space, and I feel as though the more it's utilized, the more it's just better. It's here for the community, and it's here for our members as well. So by default, I just started to sit in a few of those meetings, and I thought, wow, well, this is interesting. I'm staying, and I'm coming to the next one too. So that's kind of how it happened. I just took the time to listen, and it really sparked something within inside me that thought, this is an opportunity like I've never seen before for people to come together and just say, we can do this. I've got that attitude where if I have an idea, I generally can make it happen, as long as it's legal. Yeah. That's what I always preface. But I just saw such huge opportunity, and I really liked the energy in the room. And what I liked too is these were all new people to me. There were some that I knew, but there were so many people that I've never seen before, I've never spoken to before, and they were equally as passionate. So we found a commonality, and I started to sit in on all of the groups.
Yeah.
As a result.
It was really funny because we started holding these working groups, and Michele at first was like, hey guys, she opened the doors and let us in and turned the lights on, and then she was like, all right, I'll see you guys in an hour when you're all done. And then she started staying a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and next thing you know, she's like showing up and participating, and it was super cool to watch. And we've seen that with a lot of people who showed up to say, well, this sounds interesting, let's see about it, and then stayed because they got involved. And there's a number of people who are just really, really been influential in what's going on long term. When you think about the long term, 10 years from now, Herkimer Next, what does that look like in your mind? And what does its role in the region look like, not just in the village of Herkimer?
Right. I do see it, some employees, obviously by then, and in a formal location, certainly. Running programs also in tandem with this. So, perhaps some youth leadership programs, and in addition, being a really integral part with all of the municipalities. We talk about consolidation all the time with just services and different things. We can help bridge the gap between communication.
Right.
I see that as being a key role.
And what do you, because this is just you, Michele Hummel, not the Chamber of Commerce president.
Right, yeah, I want to be very clear about that.
True. So in that role, when you think about Herkimer 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what's in your brain as you've gone through this process with Launch Herkimer?
Sure.
What are the things you've seen in your brain, the pictures that come to mind when you talk about Herkimer long term?
I see some hustle and bustle. I see some attractions that bring people to the area. Whether it be, maybe we get a shoe store. I don't know what that exactly looks like, but I do see it cleaned up, and I do see, especially that 100 block, moving in the right direction, and other areas too. So again, this is not just Main Street. It feels very much like it could be just Main Street, but it's not. It could be, something happens on Washington Street and they want some help. We're there for anyone, but I can definitely see this being here long term. I mean, it's going to outlast me. It's going to outlast you. It's going to outlast all of the administrations that are in place today.
One of the things, too, that there's been some questions about, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to make sure I cover everything. Just want to formally announce my wife and I have moved here to the Mohawk Valley. So we're going to be involved in Herkimer Next as board members, and specifically helping longer term in a volunteer capacity, which we're excited about. It's been fun to do this. So that, for those who are like, this guy came out of nowhere from Idaho and riled everybody up and then skipped town and never did anything. No, we're long term here. We've relocated here because we believe in this community, in this area so much. So for those of you who are thinking, well, this guy's crazy, he's like, no, we're putting our money where our mouth is, actually.
You are. I remember very early on saying, you need to move here. So I'm going to take credit.
You can take it. It's all you. It's all you.
Yeah.
When The process of becoming a 501c3 and that piece there, would you kind of just, I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but I want to make sure people clearly understand the process that you've gone through, because you've learned a lot in this process.
I really have.
And we get this all the time. I get people asking me all the time, like, well, how do we start a 501c3? What is that? Would you give people just like a real short crash course on how that works?
Absolutely. So the first thing you need to do is file your articles of incorporation with New York State, if you're here in New York State. And that can be time consuming. So you fill them out, and it's, I would recommend, I mean, if you can afford a lawyer and you can get a lawyer, you've got those resources, by all means do it. I think it will streamline the process for you, but it's not something you 100% need to do. So I did go through it. I was very well read, and I used, Nikon as a resource in terms of what they have available, just even on their website. It was helpful. So, and by the way, Nikon is the New York State Council of Not-for-Profits.
Oh.
Yes. So, and they're a great resource. But so I went through that process, and I wasn't hearing anything. It had been quite a while. So I went as far as to check and see, did they cash the check? And when they had not cashed the check yet, I thought, okay, we're going to be here a long, long while.
Which, by the way, I want to point out, somebody generously donated that fee.
Yes.
Just to make sure that this happened.
That's correct.
Which is super cool.
Yeah, I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. So we thank her for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we went ahead, I did that, and I waited. So we have a lot of guests on this show that are politically minded, and they're not just local officials, but regional and state as well. So I reached out to an elected official, and I want to thank him very much formally. And I said, hey, you know what? Can you help me? And sure enough, he knew a person who knew a person, and I got a call directly from New York State, Department of State, and they were able to kind of put us to the top of the stack, and we got it done that way. So the minute you get that done, you receive your email that says it's complete, and there's a link right in it to apply for your tax identification number. Mm-hmm. Once you have that, then you can apply with Department of Taxation for your 501c3.
And then, do you know how long that takes?
I'm sorry, for your not-for-profit status.
Right. And do you know how long that takes?
It could take a long time. So what happens is, so you're applying for your tax exemption.
Yes.
Officially, but it could be a year. It really could.
Right.
But what's interesting about it, and I learned this along the way through various resources, that it goes retro. So let's say they don't approve Herkimer Next to be tax exempt until next May.
Yeah.
It goes retro, so it will go back to today's effective date. And that means, what that really means is that we can go ahead and start collecting donations if someone did want to, and they would be able to write them off on their taxes.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
we're really ready to be up and running.
Right,
100%.
Right now, today in October of 2022, if somebody did want to donate, what would that money go towards, and how would that? Why would that be? Would somebody want to do that right now for Herkimer Next? Mm-hmm.
So right now, we've got little projects, like we do have the Main Street cleanup, so we might use a little bit for supplies there. But largely, I think what it would do right now is it would sit. It would sit, and it would just collect until we do have a major project. So eventually, we want to be able to afford our own QuickBooks. Yeah. We want to be able to do some things administratively. So we need to get that part up and running so that we can support the documentation that's going to be required. And I we'll be able to get there sooner than you think. So I'm not too worried about that. But the donations largely right now, if someone were to, and we're not actively soliciting large donations, so just to be clear about that, but it would go towards projects. And if someone said, okay, I want to give you this $50, but I want it to make sure that it only goes towards this, we do have the means to take care of that. So if you've got $50 and you only want it to go towards the street cleanup, then that's where it will be allocated. If you want to donate $50 and you want it to go towards flowers on Main Street in the spring, that's what it's going to go for.
Right, because right now those flowers come out of the village budget, right? Mm-hmm. So, I had lost my train of thought. I had a great
Welcome
question
to my
ask.
world.
Rusty tracks.
That's true. That's true. I've been doing all right so far. When you let's talk about the board for a minute, because there's
Yeah.
executive team.
Yes.
Do you want to share with people who they are? or-
Sure.
Okay.
So Miriam Curry
Yes.
is our secretary, and Russell Clark is our CFO.
Right.
So and then I would be board president. In New York State, you need 3 board members currently to file your incorporation. So that's what we did. We started small. We will be adding to that board of directors very soon. As of our next meeting, Chris will be voted in. So we're gonna grow our board very slowly and thoughtfully as well. We don't want to just add people for the sake of adding people. We want everyone to be. We want it to be diverse. We want it to have a purpose. We want different areas of expertise as well. So
Right.
we would love to have an attorney, for obvious
Yeah.
reasons. So we'll be looking at those things and different talents.
Go into, because some people don't understand like a nonprofit board and the role that they play. How do you see this board functioning longer term, and what kinds of people would you like to see on that board? Like big, if you could wave a magic
Yeah.
wand, you had the perfect board ever for a nonprofit.
Well,
what role would they play, and what are the kinds of people you'd see on there outside of an attorney?
Okay, so Steve Wynn, I'm coming for you. But people who are influential in the community, certainly. We want people who are recognized even at the state level already, perhaps. And I would expect them to have a very big advisory role into what we're going to do, which projects are going to be feasible to attack, I shouldn't say attack, to try to accomplish, and which ones perhaps we should just hold off on and stay clear of, or just build the fund a little bit larger before we go out. So we're really looking for advisories, an advisory role.
And what kinds of people would you, outside of Steve Wynn, what are the character traits and the skill sets that you would be looking for?
Okay, so strong business leaders, people who have already perhaps made a success of their own business. Also some that are up and coming, and they're working on growing their business. So different levels I think would be good. But people who are influential in the community at large, just maybe they have some contacts. We want people like that that way we can kind of pull our resources together, because it does take more than one person. I definitely understand that. You really need a group of people who are willing to actually put in the time as well.
Right.
So, we're trying to skip over, and forgive me, but that sometimes when you're moving up in the world and you're growing, we don't want those people who are trying to just stick it on their resume that they're on a board of directors.
Right.
Clearly we want some people with leadership skills.
And I think that in some people's mind, they look at those kinds of positions as I feel good about myself because I'm on the board. But there's actually some work that goes into being on a board. There's a job there. And that's why people who are on a lot of boards are always busy. I think I've got people in this community who we all know by name, and we go, they're on every board. Well, that's because they're actively involved in the community. And so as a board member, and this is for people who don't understand kind of the role of, especially with a nonprofit, what the board would do. It's to help keep the, that's what I'm looking for, the vision and the mission central to what happens. So a lot of times in an organization, you can get down in the weeds and bogged down by things and forget that, that's not really our mission, right? Because you get an opportunity.
Yes, governance is extremely important to me. So I will say I'm going to be looking for somebody to kind of know those bylaws inside and out. We've got a draft of bylaws. They have not been approved yet, but they're quite lengthy, and we wrote the bylaws as though we are a large organization, even though we're not quite yet, so that we don't have to go back and revisit them later on. So they're going to be approved by NICON. We're going to utilize them. First thing we're going to do is join them. We'll be a member. It's based on income as a sliding scale, so it's actually something we could afford.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to donate that because compliance is just extremely important.
Right.
We're going to make sure that we're dotting every I and crossing every T. And going back to the board members, I'm looking for somebody who might even be willing to speak on our behalf and advocate for us in the community, and go out. And when they're talking to other people that they know, they'll explain the concept that we have and what our mission and values are,
right.
and try to help, be an ambassador.
It's interesting, too, because one of the other functions, to your point, that a board member does is it gives credibility and some authority to the mission of the organization. So Ark Herkimer is a great example of a group who we all know what they do. Kevin Crossley's amazing.
Yes.
The board members that he have are all people who are very influential in the community. And if they're involved in something, you go, well, there's obviously some really smart people and some very educated people and some very invested people who are they're involved in this, so it can't be some fly-by-night rinky-dink operation.
Right.
And then there's other organizations where we've seen this throughout the history of our country, actually, where people go, hey, we're starting this thing, we have this mission, but they don't really have that governance piece and they don't have those board pieces in place. And so they end up looking like kind of a fly-by-night operation who doesn't know what they're doing. So that's one of those other roles, is to lend that credibility to the organization. Also, to actually lend some expertise. To your point, it would be nice to have some people on the board who have a tradition of philanthropy or background in economic development or those kind of things, which is part of the reason that I wanted to stay on and help with this board, because I feel like in any organization, and we've all been a part of it, whether it's the church choir or the American Red Cross, there are pulls to get involved in things on all different fronts. And the board's job, one of their jobs, is to go, hey guys, that's not what we're here for. Cool opportunity. And an example like this, it could be something like, well, we feel like we should be planting a new cemetery because there's too many people, the cemetery's filling up, but we need a new one. And that's one of those areas where it could very well be needed. It could very well be a really important thing to the community, but that's not the purpose of Herkimer Next.
Right, correct. Yeah, we will remain our focus.
And I think that the last piece is there are times where any organization needs introductions to people who can help them accomplish their mission. And that's one of the other jobs of those board members, is to help lend those introductions. And so there may be people listening today who go, well, I mean, I got so many things going on, but I don't know if I want to get involved. Just your ability to make introductions to resources and people who could tie into the mission of Herkimer Next would be absolutely instrumental in getting to the next steps.
Most definitely. Yeah. We're looking for all of those people, and truly economic development, I think, is one of the larger pieces.
Do you have the mission vision statement written yet, or is that still coming?
Well, it's still coming. I have things written down, but again, we meet as a board later on this month, and then things will be approved. So I'd be more likely to speak about it then. But I've got some drafts for sure, and some key values, and we'll be announcing those soon.
Very cool. Very cool. If somebody were listening today and they wanted to be involved in the board, or even just be involved, how would they go about doing that now that there's been this transition? Because traditionally you'd have been like, well, just shoot Chris Chochran a text and you can get involved. And it's transitioning now. So what does that look like?
Right. So going forward, we will have a separate email address that has not been done yet. It probably will be done by tomorrow, but we'll announce that at a later date. But for right now, people can call me directly. So Michele Hummel, and my phone number, I'm just going to give it out here right on the air, 315-717-4998. That's my direct cell phone number. So if anybody wanted to hear more about this or was interested in any level, I'd be happy to have a conversation, and please reach out.
Yeah. Can we talk some specifics about some things going on right now that Launch Herkimer has been involved in?
Sure.
We talked, and you and I can both kind of talk about this because we've both done it, but I'd love to kind of dive into where we're at with certain pieces. And one of those was when I first got approached about this, it was that we were going to apply for the DRI. The Village of Herkimer was going to apply for the DRI.
Right.
Are you familiar with where that is at, or would you like me to address it?
Well, I believe the Village of Herkimer is not applying for the DRI or New York Forward at this point.
And are you familiar with why?
My understanding is that they couldn't get things together in all the projects. I'm not really 100% sure, so I guess I would be speaking out of turn.
Okay, so I want to make sure people understand this because, again, we talked about administrating grants. Somebody has to be there to say, hey, grant issuer, we're going to take your money and then we're going to show you how we spent it, and we're going to show you how it got used the way that you intended it to get used. That's called grant administration. They may or may not be doing all the work. They may be collecting the right people. So let's just say that someone was going to give a grant for a Main Street revitalization of $1 million. I'm making this up. It doesn't exist. But let's say someone was going to give us $1 million and we could do whatever we wanted with it on Main Street. They would require that somebody go, I will start the process of collecting up whatever the projects are going to be. I will start the process of getting the community involved. I will start the process of, and by I mean like an organization usually. We will start the process of getting the community involved. We'll start the process of circulating around what's possible and start collecting feedback and start identifying the ways we're going to use this money so that, and then reporting back to them on a very regular basis. Sometimes it's weekly depending on who the grant issuer is. And that's called grant administration.
Right.
That is super important because if there's not an organization or a group within a municipality to do that, they are underfunded and understaffed and under-equipped to actually administrate that grant. So if you were going to give if you had $1 million, you proverbial listener had $1 million, and you were going to give it to somebody, and you go, here, you're going to use this to make your life better, and the person you're going to give it to goes, I don't even know where to start. You'd be throwing good money after bad.
Right.
And so that's the way that these grant issuers avoid throwing good money after bad or just flushing it down the toilet to stupid projects that aren't going to actually make people's lives better. So part of the role of Launch Herkimer and part of what we were doing was, do we have the ability to do that in 6 months? And the truth is, no, Herkimer's just behind the curveball, and they're too far behind the curveball to get that in place in 6 months. Now, the groundwork has been laid, and we are in the process of getting ready. And part of this 501c3 is that now we have somebody and a group of people who can start fulfilling that role of grant administration. And so when we talked to the grant writer who the village hired about the same time as me, she came back to us and just said, listen, I don't think that the village is ready to apply for either one of these grants because there's so much administrative work that needs to go on. There's so many projects that need to be identified, and there needs to be a little more cohesion between the elected officials in the municipality and this group here who just got off the ground in May. There needs to be some more like hand-holding and working together in order to facilitate those grants. And so that's why there's not going to be a grant. Now, that doesn't mean other grants aren't going to be applied for. There's a Restore New York grant that's being suggested to be applied for. There are other grants that people will apply for to tear buildings down and those kind of things. That's all coming in the next 6 to 9 months. But again, this didn't happen in 6 weeks. Though we didn't get to this place in 6 weeks, it's going to take more than 6 weeks to fix it all.
Right. Well, yeah, it took a while to get this off the ground. I mean, just from the idea of it and making it come to fruition and going through that process, that lengthy process of the paperwork.
Right.
So we'll be ready when the time comes. I can assure you that.
One of the groups that we started, when I was going through the working groups yesterday, we were having this conversation. The volunteers group was one that we started, and they never really went anywhere.
Because there was really nothing to volunteer for at the time.
There was a lot of stuff in the background that just still needed to be put together in order for volunteers to do this. The funding group is now kind of shifting into more of the executive team for the nonprofit. There was, we're going to be doing some shifting of groups in the coming weeks, either combining them into groups that can take on a bigger responsibility together, or ones that just aren't, like the DRI group, that's still going to be needed, but they're going to need to be doing that longer term and in less of a Launch Herkimer mode and more of a, here's the grant we're going for, here's what the grant requires. And now we have some time because those grants aren't going to be issued until next year anyway.
Right.
So now is the time that we can start identifying those projects. And by the way, for those who are, I don't want to assume people know what that means. When we talk about identifying a project, it literally means we're going to knock on doors and go, hey, Mr. Building Owner, would you be interested in blank? Oh, and by the way, for some of these grants, they are not a magic check of $1 million. They are a matching grant. So what happens is, Michele, let's assume for a second, let's look at Dave. Dave owns a building on Main Street in Herkimer, and it's in disrepair, and it needs to be repaired. And everyone goes, we need to see Dave's building repaired.
No.
And he would say no. We would go to Dave, and we go, Dave, we think we can get you some money for this. are you willing to put in money? Because we can match up to a certain percentage, but you got to come up with the rest of the money. And that has to be in place before we can actually put it on there as a project. And so there are times where people go, well, I don't have the money to redo this building, or I don't have the money to do this right now. And so somebody needs to start knocking on other doors and going, well, listen, Mr. Developer out of Syracuse, you've been wanting to get into this region for a while. What if we could partner you with this project, and here would be the return on it? Would you be willing to do that? That's the role of that group. And we just haven't had the time, partly because it was just summertime, and we haven't had the ability to actually do that work in a fast enough manner. Part of it's because people are absentee landlords. Part of it's because some of the landlords just don't have the capital to do it themselves, and so there's some partnership that needs to go in place. And that group really needs to exist longer term, but it's going to shift a little bit because they're going to be the ones now, less about time constraints and less about get this done, and more about let's start plodding along, to your point, and doing this in a methodical manner as opposed to the longer term. What role do you see Herkimer Next playing within identifying projects and those kind of things moving forward?
A lot of it will be, kind of putting together the meeting of the minds, if you will. So, us talking to the people who want to get this building repaired, and talking to the owner, and we would be doing that legwork to try to make this relationship occur and introduce opportunity to these projects. Yeah, so, we'll largely be a part of that.
Right.
And really acting as a liaison for everyone.
One of the other groups is the Vision Group, and their goal was to identify a singular industry that the village could focus on and say, we're going to be really good at this one thing. That group, by the way, has come up with some really interesting ideas all over the map, really. We've had some things that were very crazy out there, would be really cool if they happened, but they're long shots. They're not something we would do tomorrow. They've had some other things that were very doable tomorrow, and one of the roles of that group as it transitions is to identify that, hand it off to Herkimer Next, and go, all right, guys, how are we going to make this happen? What I've always said since I started working in economic developments, one of the biggest missing pieces in any community is time. Because everybody's so busy doing their specific area of work that they don't have the time and luxury of looking outside of their purview and making connections or seeing things the way they could be. So when it comes to that, whatever that vision is, let's say it turns into, I don't know, floristry or something crazy like that. Where do you see Herkimer Next playing a role in that too? And how can you see them Herkimer Next tying into other resources in the area?
Well, based on conversations, again, it will go to the relationship building. So I've already got a ton of resources, and I know a lot of people, but I think that the board is going to be a huge help in this way. So one thing that I've learned throughout my career is that I don't always know who exactly to reach out to, but I can assure you I'll find out. And I'm very good about making those connections too. So I think we're going to be the liaison. We're going to be the people who put this together.
Yeah,
I do. I think that we're going to just marry the opportunity to the project, and we'll go from there.
Awesome.
I think it's going to naturally transpire.
Well, I sure appreciate you letting me co-opt your podcast today.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, this is great. So I kind of played the role of, just co-host.
Yeah.
I like that.
So, well, thank you for having me here, and we're excited. My wife and I are both excited to be in the area.
And we are
excited to share what we've learned over the years.
Yeah, we're so blessed to have you in this area.
Awesome.
It's going to be
you.
great. So I look forward to continuing to work together.
I can't wait to clean up Main Street.
Yeah, me too. This is just kind of scratching on the surface of what's going on and what's in store for us. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly at 315-717-4998. Thank you.